Hi everybody, and welcome back to my modeling channel. So today we're gonna build a 787 Dreamliner from a Revell on scale 144. So let's open the box and see what we have inside. So we're gonna start initially that kit description with our fuselage, and basically, as you can see, the fuselage is in two parts. You have the opening for the window if you want to make them open or transparent with some masking tape, but I will most probably close them for the mold for the build. So as you can see, you have very light engravement, but for those of you who haven't seen my former video, I made a kit review of the Revell and Zvezda, and actually it is exactly the same mold and the same kit. So we're going to move on to the second part, basically where we have all the structure, and you have basically the elevator, and then you have all the details for the engines and undercarriage. You can have the options to do a lot of small details, so especially on the engine, so that's going to be quite enjoyable. And then we're going to move on to our wings. So the under part of the wings is in one part, and the upper side is in two parts, and we can see that there is quite a lot of small details, and they're really well protected, basically the wingtip, so that's gonna avoid us to have some further later on some issues. We're gonna move now toward the clear part of that kit. So you have, as I mentioned earlier, the passenger windows. You also have two landing lights will be located on the landing gear, and then you have the windscreen. So that's it for the parts, and we're gonna move on now to our kit descriptions of the manual. So lots of pages, but that's standard with Revell, with lots of explanation, and then pretty straightforward with the parts description, and then few pages left, but it goes pretty straightforward. The newer versions are normally in color. I must have bought an elder version of that 787. The highlight of that peak is mainly the decal sheet. I have to say that if I have to compare to Zvezda, the price is almost the same, but at least I have all the doors. I have lots of small logo engines. I have the static ports. I have the cone, the nose cone, and I have a lot of. I have also the lines and the structure lines for the wings. So I have a little bit more details with the decals, so which would make it my favorite choice. But that's only for me. Yeah, I can only speak for myself. Anyway, enough of talking, and let's start building. So we're gonna start this build by preparing our fuselage. So initially we're gonna cut all the passenger windows, then we're gonna glue the nose wheel well, and then we're gonna glue all those passenger windows on the fuselage. Once this is completed, we're going to add some ballast, and for this I will use modeling paste that I usually put on the nose, and that will prevent the aircraft to sink on its tail. Then we're going to glue all the side of the fuselage and put all those half together. I will use some clamps on the tail to keep it straight and to have it glued pretty well. We will then add the windscreen to the fuselage itself, and then we're gonna start working on the wings. So there will be a little bit of preparation on the wings, which is composed of three parts. The lower part is in one with the belly fairing, and then we're gonna glue all those parts together, and then we're gonna have to let it cure for a little bit. Then we're going to start closing all the gaps. So initially I will close all the gaps on the passenger windows and the windscreen, as I'm going to use decal later on, and then I will close all the other gaps on the tops and bottom of the fuselage. We will then move to close all the gaps also on the wings, and mainly on the lower part, as there has been a little bit of gaps on the junction. Then while this is drying, we're going to move on toward the engines. And so what we will do, we will prepare the various parts of the engines. Basically the fan disc going to be added together, and they are in two parts. You just have to glue them, but you'll have to play a little bit with the separation on the different fan blades. Then this can be depending on the mold, it can be a little bit challenging, but then you use a very extra thin glue. And then we're going to move toward the jet exhaust or the turbine, which is basically in two parts. And that little part right there is a little bit, you have to be a little bit cautious when you remove that extra plastic, and there will be a little bit of adjustment. Then you're going to glue the cone basically, but the best thing is to use a toothpick on the back to push it in the correct position. That's going to help you out. So while we're doing this, our putty has dried out, and now it's time to remove all the excess putty on the fuselage and the windows. So after putting the wings and the fuselage together, we're going to remove all the gaps by adding a little bit putty on the structure lines as well, and especially on the wings junction and on the leading edge. That's can be a little bit tricky, and mainly had issue on those couple of those models, mainly on the aft part basically. So after, of course, the putty has dried out, we're gonna remove the excess, and I also add an extra white Tamiya putty on the passenger windows, as there was a little bit of some gaps were still remaining. So I'm using normally two different type of compound or different type of putty, and that allow me to do basically to see exactly how is the surface. So after finishing the main part of the build, we're gonna now move on to the paint booth. So initially I will paint using some special colors. I'm gonna start to use all the leading edge and the engine lips and the APU exhaust. Then we're gonna move on to using some white color, and that's gonna be for the tail. As my decals are extremely thin, and the overall fuselage color is gray, I have to paint that part in white to avoid to have issues. So what I'm doing a primary coat basically of white. Then I'm gonna use some exhaust metallic paint for the exhaust of the engine, and I'll have to do a little bit of fiddling, and then I'll do also the main core of the engines the same way. Then we're gonna move on to a matte black for the fan disc, and then shortly after that we'll be able to put a second coat of white paint on the tail, basically for the logo. After a lot of hours of observations and checking a lot of different pictures, the difference in tones, I realized that the wings, basically overall color, and the horizontal stabilizer were also a glossy white color. So I had to add that before starting spraying the very light gray coat on the fuselage. Then I had to move on to the black color, and that's what I use, a matte black from Tamiya to paint basically all our tires. Then we're gonna move forward to basically to the build of the engines, and there is a dark ring on the intake, normally close to the fan position, so I had to use some mask and to be able to replicate this. Then I use some metallic color, and as you can see, the leading edge of those fan blades are always the same with those. You always have basically a metallic color on the leading edge of the fan blade. Now just we're gonna use some weathering technique as well. I'm gonna use some access panel line basically on the rear of that part, but anyway, we're not gonna be able to see it as it's gonna be covered by the fan blade. Then we're gonna add the fan blade basically just toward the main intake, and then I'm gonna start to do some weathering using my makeup technique, and that's a very light rust color for that last part of the turbine, and then the back part I'm using blue burnt metal color. Then we're gonna paint the inside, basically the intake of the engines or the fan, with a light gray color. So after putting the spinner, the decal on the cone, the spinner decal, so now I'm gonna use some decal solution, and then we're gonna remove also all the masking tape on the exhaust and build the engine. So it's pretty straightforward, but I have to say that doing those little extra work on those engines can give really a nice finish to the aircraft. So after finishing our engine, we're gonna start now painting our aircraft. So I will start with the APU exhaust, and then we're gonna start painting all the leading edge of those wings, and also on the stabilizer. So we will now start to remove all the extra putty on the engines after letting it dry, and then we will move on to the rest of the build. So after that, we're gonna start painting the overall fuselage and the engine with a very light gray color. It's a mix of white, clear white, and a very light gray, but it's more about 2/3 of white for 1/3 of gray, even less sometimes. So, but for this you have to use the bold eye to see how does it look like, and I did a lot of comparison with different pictures and photography, which helped me to do it. After this, we're gonna move on to the undercarriage, and we're gonna start to prepare the wheels. So I will prepare the inside part of the tires, and for this I will use a light gray color, and just using a hand paint and a little paintbrush, and then we're gonna have to work further up and try to finish as smooth as possible. So now I'm adding a start to the decal process, and as you can see, you need really to have a white fond before you start to apply the decals, otherwise the gray color is gonna give you some stains. So I have some wrinkles, of course, unfortunately, because those decals are pretty big and the surface is irregular, but with a little bit of time and patience you can get a pretty decent result. So while those decals are drying, we're gonna start working now on the front nose wheel and on the tires, and then we're gonna start going back to the decaling process. So for this now I'm putting the passenger windows and the company logo, and it's also a pretty big surface, but not as wide, so there was not much wrinkle. And I have to say that the NASCAR decal are pretty good quality. They are soft and they are very easy to work with. So while the left side is going to dry, now we're going to start working a little bit on the undercarriage. So initially I'm going to paint the struts with a metallic color, and that's going to be on the overhaul of the undercarriage. Then we're going to add the brake units, then the tires, and there will be also a little bit of weathering at the end. It's now time to apply the decal on the right side of the aircraft, and so of course a little bit of fiddling, trying to align the windows correctly with the passengers doors and all the rest of the model itself, but nothing too difficult. The big challenge was the logo, I have to say, but the left side went pretty easily, so I'll keep this big part for the end. Of course, a little bit of fiddling around, a little bit of water is going to help out to move the decals toward the models, and then it's going to be an easy fix. While our decals are drying out, so we're gonna use some accent panel lines on that undercarriage. That's gonna give some more a little bit of a reality effect and a little bit of dirt, like those aircraft are normally looking. And then we're gonna build the nose gear as well, and then we're gonna add slowly everything on the fuselage. Last part of the build, so we're gonna now add our engines on the model, and then we're gonna put the horizontal stabilizer. Then will be the last part. We'll be adding some antennas, rotating beacons, and the model will be ready for display. And this is the final result of that 787-800 from American Airlines on scale 1/44. I hope you enjoyed that build with me. If you did so, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I will see you soon for another build review and kit. Thank you for watching.